All right, party people. So I figured today we would do a video on the top 10 mistakes that people make when they're building their first AR-15. And in fact, I've made these mistakes too, even after I built my first AR. But I kind of came up with the idea for today's video because AR-15 right here for a good friend of mine. This is his first gun ever. He texted me a while back asking, hey, I'm looking to get an AR-15. What would you recommend? And I recommended to him this Palmetto State Armory build kit. I have a couple of Palmetto State Armory guns. I built this AR pistol here about a year or so ago, and it's been holding up really well. It really surprised me. So because I had a good experience with this one, and because I had a good experience with their AKM, I figured, hey, I'll recommend that to him, and he's a dear friend. So that's what inspired today's video. Just a heads up, if you see anything in today's video that you want to, check the price of, just follow the first link in the video description. I'll also pin that link in the comments. That way it'll be the first comment at the top. All the stuff that's relevant in today's video. So the number one mistake that I've seen people make is not planning out their build. And what I mean by that is not really defining what it is you want your rifle or pistol or whatever the case is. Not defining what you want it to accomplish, not defining, what the budget is to be. This is the very first AR-15 that I ever built. Don't get me wrong, the trigger has been added since I got it. This optic's been added, this handguard's been added, this barrel shroud's been added. But prior to that, it just had a mil-spec trigger. It had a different handguard and all that stuff. But in 2015 was when I built my very first AR-15. I built one before I've ever even bought one. I think I only have two AR-15s, actually maybe three AR-15s that actually came from the factory already built. The rest of them I either pieced together or I bought as a build kit. And this one is one that I pieced together. It's a Radical Firearms upper, Anderson lower, and this one has the Magpul stock on it right now, but it did have a Mission First tactical stock on it, Magpul grip, all that stuff. And when I first built this, it was not as cheap to build AR-15s as it is today. I think when I bought this and got it all assembled, I had to wait like 3 months for the upper because everybody was freaking out. They thought, Hillary was gonna win the elections and guns were gonna be banned. I didn't even know all that was going on when I was wanting to build it. I was just like, wow, I kind of want to get an AR-15. I had no idea what was going on politically. And I remember I placed the order for the upper, and it was a barreled upper. I mean, it literally took, I think I ordered it early December. I didn't get it until the end of February. So, just a heads up, guys, the gun world, even if you're buying it online, is not gonna be like Amazon. And the reason I bring that up is I talk to a lot of guys that are FFLs that sell stuff, and they get a lot of complaints from people that the shipping took too long or this. And just understand, when it's made in America, and because of what's happening with coronavirus and riots, things are gonna be back ordered, guys. That's just the nature of the game. But anyways, I planned this build out. I had to mainly plan my build out based around budget because budget was my biggest crunching factor. I had approximately $700 in my budget to spend on an AR-15. And before I built this, I remember watching a video from Iraq Veteran 8888. This is way before I started YouTube. It's funny how we're friends now, but weird how life works. But I remember watching their video and I took away a piece of advice that I have actually echoed in a lot of my videos in the past. And this is actually gonna bring up my second mistake that a lot of people make. Cheaping out, but not just cheaping out in regards to price, cheaping out on quality, but even more so than that, cheaping out on the barrel and the bolt carrier group. So essentially the entire heart of the gun is the barrel and the bolt carrier group. Those are the parts of the gun that are gonna experience the most wear and tear because that's where the explosions occur. So choosing a barrel and or a bolt carrier group that really has no name to it, or not even just a name, no reputation to it, or a bolt carrier group that hasn't been high pressure tested and magnetic particle inspected. And the same thing with the barrel. You at least want to know that when that barrel left the facility, that it was at least high pressure tested, and magnetic particle inspected. And I'll actually include a link to some of my favorite barrels that were magnetic particle inspected and, high pressure tested. And I also have a video on how to choose bolt carrier groups. I will link that in the description if you'll watch it later. But what that taught me at the time was I need to base my entire build around the barrel and the bolt carrier group. So if I gotta splurge on something, splurging on the barrel and the bolt carrier group. Now, I haven't made a video dedicated to AR-15 barrels, but I'll put it like this. Even with the affordable barrels, 99% of people in America aren't gonna outshoot their barrels. And what I mean by that is A, they're probably not going to be more accurate than a barrel can be. And B, they aren't going to shoot enough rounds through it to wear out the rifling in the barrel. And so, most standard, mil-spec barrels are going to do you just fine, which is why I recommended the Palmetto State Armory to my friend, was because they use standard mil-spec parts, and I've had no issues with their stuff. And now I haven't fired that gun yet. If I have issues with it, I'll definitely make a video about it. But me and him are gonna go shooting later this week. I don't think he's ever fired one, so I gotta show him how to do it. But don't cheap out on the barrel and the bolt carrier group. At the bare minimum, just make sure that they're high pressure tested, magnetic particle inspected, and then plan out your build. Going back to number 1. Number 3, spending too much, especially spending too much money on the wrong things. As an example for that, I don't think people should spend more than $120 max on a lower receiver. That's just a personal opinion, guys. Way back when, I remember people would buy Spike's tactical lowers for $250. I don't know how much they cost today, but people would buy them and they're like, oh my God, this lower is so great. And it just looks cool. It really adds zero functionality to the firearm. So for me, if you're gonna build just a standard AR-15, there's no reason to spend more than $100 on a lower receiver. Now, with that being said, there are benefits to spending a little bit more on lower receivers. As an example, you can get lowers as cheap as $40 and they can go up from there. Now, I'll have a link to this in the build list for you, but I highly recommend these Aero Precision M4 E1 lowers. Couple of reasons, which is actually gonna tie into the next part for number 4. 2 things that I like about this lower more than any other lower. Number 1, the trigger guard is integrated. A lot of people, when they're building their first AR-15, when they're installing these trigger guards, break these ears. You can get this trigger guard here where they're threaded. So you have a threaded portion here and a threaded portion here, and you just, use an Allen wrench to screw it in. So if you have a lower like this, I highly suggest I'll put a link to where you can get these trigger guards, but they're threaded trigger guards. That way you don't accidentally break an ear. The second reason that I like this, aside from having this integrated trigger guard, is right here on this bolt catch. This bolt catch is also threaded. You don't gotta hammer a punch in. This is definitely one of the most difficult roll pins to drive in on an AR-15 build, especially when you're using a hammer and punch. Now, if you are gonna use a hammer and punch, put painter's tape all over the side of this and use the proper tools, which we're gonna cover proper tools here in a second. So another thing that I see people spending too much money on is the way their gun looks, or they're more worried about features than they are the quality of the gun or the way that it shoots. A great example of that would be a mistake I made on this AK right here. When I got this AK, it originally had, the short forend, where the forend only came out to here. It was made of wood, stuff like that. And I wanted something that had a tactical rail. So I got this awesome Midwest Industries rail. The problem is, it's freaking heavy. It makes the gun easier to shoot because it doesn't bounce as much, but it is a hog to just go from low ready up to here. It messes with me because I was used to it being lighter. So, don't worry about key mod versus M-LOK. That's fine. I have both. One thing that a lot of people like to stress over when they're building an AR-15 is their handguard. Oh, do I get key mod? Do I get M-LOK? I'm just gonna be honest. I know there's been studies to show that when you're throwing these off a bridge, that M-LOK might hold up a little bit better. But for the standard American, it ain't gonna affect you, I promise. I have M-LOKs, I have key mods. I've never had anything come off because I torque everything down correctly. That's not to say that they won't, I'm just telling you what my experiences are. So, I wouldn't worry too much about, the hand guards and stuff like that. Just find one that you like. You don't gotta go spend a ton of money on it. Another area where I see people spending a ton of money is on CNC machined lowers. Now, I'm all about getting CNC machined receivers, but not just the lower. One of the benefits to getting a CNC receiver is because you don't get this wobbly. Listen. So that's the upper and the lower. There's a little bit of a gap between them. And in this case, I'm using different brands between the upper and the lower. But sometimes even with the same brand, you'll still get some of that slop. With that said, when you get CNC lowers, they definitely have way less slop, especially when you get them as a machined set. This is a set from Ascend Armory. These are pretty much impossible to find right now. I will include a link, but I don't know if they're gonna be in stock. This is gonna be a build that I'm gonna build in the future. But if you listen, there's a little bit of play right here, but that's because it's not assembled. But For the most part, this thing is rock solid in regards to the fitment between the upper and the lower because it's a matched set. Now these do get a little bit pricey. You know, whenever I've had a gun that had any play between the upper and the lower, I've never really had any issues with the gun because of that. So it's more of an OCD thing than it is, you know, an actual real benefit to the functionality of an AR-15. Now, one thing that I have had is this is a Stag Arms lower. This was a replacement lower because the original lower that I got, the mag well wasn't machined out completely enough and no mags would fit in it. And that does happen, guys. Like, it can happen to any company that makes lowers. Basically, something slips through the cracks, maybe that's not machined out enough, and then now all of a sudden mags won't fit. You know, little things like that are bound to happen, but that's why you order from a reputable dealer or a reputable brand that has a good return policy. Now, earlier when I was talking about, you know, breaking ears off lowers and showing you that the lower that I liked, because you didn't have to worry about breaking ears, that all kind of comes down to having the right tools. I'm actually in the process of upgrading all of my AR-15 tools because all of these tools are really old and they're getting really worn out. Here's the bare minimum for what you would need to build an AR-15 if you buy it as a barreled upper. And what I mean by that is that's my favorite type of kit to recommend people, where the upper's already assembled together and then you assemble the lower. That's usually going to be the best bet for a very, very beginner. And that's what I did when I bought mine. I just bought a barreled upper because there are more tools required and there's more skill that's needed in order to assemble an upper correctly, which we'll talk about in a second. But as a bare minimum, you know, this is just a set of roll pin punches. And if you look at the very tips of these, if you look at the very end of these, they have like a little nipple on them that fits into the end of the roll pin so your punch doesn't slide when you're actually hammering it into place. These are a big time lifesaver. The next tool that I use is a bench block. This is more for a handgun, but we'll talk more about that in a second because there's actually a new tool set that I'm gonna be upgrading to. But definitely you need a bench block, and this is something that you can set your receiver on. You can actually, you know, hammer things in, and you're not gonna scratch up the receiver or the surface that you're using to hammer on. Another thing that I use, this is a vice block for receivers. So basically your receiver fits on like this. You will pinch this between a vise, and now you have a stand for you to install your parts. These are good. The one that I'm gonna be upgrading to is a lot better. When I lived in the house that I lived in when I started this channel, I actually had like a workbench in the garage, and now this house doesn't have a workbench in the garage, and we're just renting, so I can't just go out there and build one. So I'm having to improvise. You know, I haven't been able to use this bench block, and I've just kind of had to wing it. Or you could get this other option where you get an AR-15 stand, and on the stand, you can put one of these vices and it bolts down, and then you can set it on any surface that you want to, and you won't scratch up the surface that you're using, nor will you scratch up the gun. Another thing you're definitely gonna need is an AR-15 wrench. This one is the DPMS AR-15 wrench. This is the first and only wrench that I've ever bought. It's not the best wrench out there, but it's definitely done its job. But I will make sure to link to this one, and I'll also link to a couple of other ones that I think are a lot better. You're definitely gonna need a hammer and punch set, especially one that comes with a mallet that has a nylon side and a brass side. That way you can use the nylon side and when you're hammering against a receiver, and you won't scratch off the finish and stuff like that. I'm actually in the process of upgrading this one too, because it's like 4 years old and I've bent everything up and everything's falling apart, but it's really done its job. You know, I mean, we've built like at least 10 AR-15s on this channel, and I've used it for Glock builds, I've used it for 1911 builds, and this it's really held up for me. The next thing you need is like some Arrow Shell 33. I put this stuff on like the threads of my buffer tube. That way, you know, if I ever need to take that buffer tube off, it won't seize up. And I also put this around the outside of the barrel on the chamber where it fits into the receiver. That way, if I ever want to change the barrel, I can actually upgrade that later as well, and it won't seize up. Now, this is probably going to be the most important tool that you need for any AR-15, and it'll only cost about $1 or $2. This is a 1/4-inch clevis pin. You need this if you don't want detents to go flying, 2 or 3, not only because you might lose one, but because sometimes the sizes aren't correct. Like as an example, this one's a 1/4-inch clevis pin. This one's a 1/4-inch clevis pin right here. This one is just a couple of millimeters off, and it won't fit through those holes on my receiver. So I pretty much can't use that, but that's why I bought like, you know, a handful of them. Another thing that using the right tools will prevent is breaking those ears. For example, if you have the lower receiver that I have right here, and you don't have one of these threaded trigger guards, and you do need to drive a punch through it, you can use your bench block to support the ears right here. You can drive your pins, and because you got a roll pin punch that doesn't slip, you're less likely to break the ears of your AR-15. Now, knock on wood, I've never broken an ear on here, but ever since I discovered threaded trigger guards, I haven't had to drive a pen for like the past 8 builds. In the future here, I'm actually gonna be upgrading to this kit right here. I believe it's from Real Avid. I just ordered it, so it'll arrive here, and when it arrives, I'll make sure to make a video on it. Now, if you're gonna be building an AR-15 where you are installing the barrel to an upper, there's a few other tools that you're gonna need. Number one, you're gonna need either a reaction rod. I'll make sure to put links in the description where you pick these up. You're either gonna need a reaction rod, or you're gonna need another vise block for your upper receiver when you're installing the barrels. The second thing that you're gonna need is a torque wrench, because you wanna get that barrel nut torqued down to spec. That way, it doesn't back out. Another set of tools you're gonna need is a set of go and no-go gauges, so you can test the headspace before you shoot the gun. Typically if you buy a barreled upper receiver from a company and the barrel's already set into place, it's most likely already been headspace checked, especially if it's from a reputable company. For example, with this BCM Recce 14, this is definitely my favorite rifle of all time. They're about $1,300 to $1,500 depending on where you get them. I'll try to find links to them, but these, you can literally buy them as an upper or just buy them as a lower and things like that. Maybe you want this badass barrel and this badass bolt carrier group and you want to put your own lower on it. Now you can save some money by building your own lower. So, with this, I know 100% just by the quality control that these guys do, it's definitely headspaced. If you haven't seen that video that I made on this gun, it'll blow your mind. I'll put a link in the description, but the amount of quality control that these guys go through to build these, they're insane. So you're definitely gonna need those. Torque wrench, you're definitely gonna need either a reaction rod or a bench block, and you're gonna need a set of go and no-go gauges. Therefore, if you are inexperienced or you've never built anything before, over at the build list, I'm gonna put links to my favorite build kits that I've used over time. Mistake number 5. Not buying what you wanted from the get-go just because you're trying to cheap out. This kind of ties in with the number 2 one of cheaping out. A lot of times, you'll see something that you want, or that something has like a great reputation. As an example, you're like, what? I really want to get a BCM bolt carrier group because I hear they're like bomb proof. And you're like, oh man, they're like $150 or I don't remember how much they cost, maybe 180. I don't remember. And you're like, I'm definitely gonna get that bolt carrier group. But because it goes over your budget a little bit, you're not willing to wait another month to save up the money to buy it. So you cheap out and you buy some no-name bolt carrier group or something that's subpar to that. Well, you're not gonna be happy, because you're always gonna know, I could have had something that was a little bit better and the difference in price wasn't that much. I would say, don't let anyone dictate to you what you should get. Now, there are companies out there that sell really cheap AR-15s and I don't know what their quality is like. And, because I don't know what their quality is like, I don't typically recommend them to people. I only recommend things to people that I've actually tried. Now, the next mistake that I see people make, and this isn't dogma right here, this one's actually gonna be, I could see people fighting in the comments over this one. I don't shoot reloaded ammo out of AR-15s or any rifle for that matter. Main reason being, if you get a double charge load on a rifle, you're gonna blow your face off. And don't get me wrong, double charge loads can happen with factory ammo. However, it's more likely to happen with reloaded ammo. That's a personal opinion mistake that I think is. Some people say, man, I shoot it all the time, it's not a big deal. I've just seen enough things where, with a handgun, I will shoot, reloaded ammunition all the time. If I have a mistake, there is a possibility that could hurt my hands, but there's way less of a possibility that it's gonna blow up and, knock an eyeball out or something like that. And usually if you get a double charge load on a handgun, sometimes you might get your hand hurt, sometimes you don't. But the main thing is it's not next to your head. Whereas when you have a rifle, you got the chamber, right here. Get your hand right here, you're all up on it like this. If this thing blows up, it's going right at your eyeball. So that's just something, that's a personal opinion. Like I said, I know people will probably fight about it in the comments, but I think shooting reloaded ammunition out of a rifle, bad idea. Now, the next mistake that I think that people make when they're building their new rifle is just not shooting it. They build it and they get it all put together, they go shoot it like once or twice and they never shoot it again. They're like, oh, I'm gonna put it over here in the safe or over here in the closet until I need it to defend my life. And as a gun enthusiast, enthusiast, I understand that shooting is a very perishable skill. I've seen a lot of ups and downs in my shooting ability over the past couple of years. And here in the past few months, I haven't really done that much shooting. I've been busy with other things, and I just haven't been able to make it to the range as often. And in my last range trip, I noticed a ton of fundamentals that I just forgot in my head. For like a rifle, for example, and low ready, you have the safe on, and then when you come up, you have the safe off, and then you press the trigger. Before a couple of months ago, I was pretty much able to go from low ready to shoot and have that safety disabled and a shot on target very quickly. And that faded very fast. And I even realized, with handguns, when I'm gripping it, I have my support hand like kicked out like this. I remember the last time I went shooting, or the time before that, I was shooting and I didn't have my elbow kicked up and I had all this recoil, and I'm like, what? And I was like, oh yeah, kick your elbow out. So definitely shoot your guns. Definitely invest in ammo, because your gun's useless without it. The number 10 mistake that I see on AR-15s is people not cleaning them, or not cleaning them correctly. Unless you have a piston-driven AR-15, this thing, I think, needs to be cleaned every time you shoot it. And that's what I do. Every time I take these to the range and I get them home, I just clean them, and I don't let the carbon build up. But because these guns shit where they eat, for a lack of a better term, meaning the gas comes all the way back into the chamber, fouls up the chamber with a lot of carbon and lead, you really want to make sure you get that chamber cleaned out, because you're going to have a lot of issues if you don't. Let me show you more about what I mean. As a quick bonus for today's video, I'll just kind of run down real quick, what tools I use, why I think they're important. I keep my cleaning very simple, actually. It used to be a lot more complicated, but once you find the right tools, things tend to just get easier over time. Number one, I use Shooter Lube. It's a two-step system. You can either use this or CLP. My main reasoning for using this is, number one, it's non-toxic. You could literally eat it. And because of that, there's zero smell or odor to it. And so, I've been using it for going on 3 years now, and it's always taken the carbon off and it's not eroded through anything. The second things that I used for tools is the Otis chamber cleaner. And essentially what you would do is you'd spray your cleaner, down into your chamber down here. You'd reach this tool, and this tool has these replaceable pads on it. So, over time, when they get wore out, you replace them, and it goes down into your chamber and it cleans out all the grime. That's really important, because you can see how the lugs on your bolt here are shaped. If you get too much carbon in there and this bolt, one of these bolt lugs right here hits that piece of carbon, then it can literally shear off one of these lugs. So you don't want that to happen. So that's how I clean the chamber. And then to clean the barrel, I simply, keep spraying more cleaner down in here. Then I drop this little fella through it. This is the rope. There's different versions of these ropes, but this is one I use. And I just pull it through I usually do it twice, just like that. And then it pulls all the carbon out. And then, I'll look down the barrel with light coming into it just to see. But overall, that's how I clean the upper. Now, the other thing that's important to clean on an AR-15 is your bolt. And to clean the bolt and the firing pin, I use a couple different tools. First off, I would spray this down and I would let it soak in cleaner for a little bit before I start attempting this, but I just wanted to show you what this bolt does. Number one, you can see on this bolt here that I got a lot of carbon built up right here on the nose of it. Now, I don't remember if that's called a nose, but that's what I'm gonna call it. So it has this little space right here, and you just twist it, and it cleans off the carbon, and you can already see how it started cleaning some. We got a shiny spot. So anyways, you spray it down with cleaner, let it soak, and it takes more off, and then you just do that over and over and over again until that's completely clean. The other thing that it does is it cleans down into your carrier right here with this side here. Simply goes down, you turn it same way. I mean, these are all areas that are really difficult to clean on a bolt carrier group. And this little tool, it's called the bone tool. I'll have a link to it. It's been really good. Now, the next way that it cleans it is on our firing pin. I'm gonna wipe it off. Now, this firing pin actually isn't that bad. Typically on our firing pin, you're gonna get a lot of carbon buildup where the firing pin meets this cylinder part. And it's really difficult to get off. Well, if yours is built up, this one isn't. It has another space right here, so you can just twist it and then you get all the carbon off of that. Another tool that I use, and this isn't actually the tool, this is just a stand-in for the tool, but I do use a brush. Now, this is a copper brush. The brush that I use is actually from Otis as well. The only reason I'm not showing it to you is because I misplaced it and I can't find it. I think it's in my range bag. If this is a gun part, you know, you can get all the carbon off with that, and it uses plastic, really stiff plastic bristles that won't, you know, mar up the finish of your parts. Back up top. It's my top 10 mistakes that I see people doing when they're building AR-15s. Don't get me wrong, they're not always going to be a mistake. You know, for example, you can totally build an AR-15 with the wrong tools and make it work right and not scratch it up, because I've done it before. However, not everyone has the ability to build an AR-15 with the wrong tools and, you know, not scratch it up. So that's why I say that's the top 10 mistakes. If I left anything out, guys, let me know down in the comments section below. If you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. If you liked today's video, hit the like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button twice. But until next time, guys, I love you. You guys stay sexy.